Kiwis is kind of like your blanket term for white New Zealanders. And Islanders kind of is a blanket term for any of like the Maori, Samoans, Tongans, anyone from the Polynesian Islands, basically. And so they're just kind of blanket terms that you would give to one or the other to differentiate. And that's kind of what they expected as well. So the Kiwis typically are more similar to Europeans in general. As far as missionary work went, you tended to have a little less success with them. But everyone in New Zealand tends to be very relaxed and very friendly compared to North America and other parts of the world I've been to. One thing that was always interesting and that we had to deal with was they didn't like to set appointments. They just kind of were very go with the flow. And so you would say, can we come by at 3 o'clock in the afternoon? They'd say, yeah, that's totally fine. And you'd either go, if you went by at 3 o'clock, they wouldn't be home. They come, you'd come by later and they'd be like, oh, I totally forgot. But you could go by, 2 or 3 hours early without ever notifying them, and they'd just let you in. You could be 4 or 5 hours late. They wouldn't be upset. They'd let you in, very different than over here, where if you'd set an appointment with someone and you weren't there on time, if they didn't, if they weren't there, at least if they're waiting for you, then, people get upset. But they very relaxed in that way. And so I did a lot more work, I think, with Islanders in general, just because they tended to be more receptive to the gospel. And so we spent more time knocking, I think, on, Kiwis' doors, but we spent a lot more time in people, in Islanders' houses. A big thing for them is that every time you go to an Islanders' house, they're going to feed you. That's just part of the culture. If they have a guest in their house, their culture requires that they provide something for you to eat. And so sometimes that was really good because you knew you didn't have a meal appointment that night. And so you'd go, let's go visit this family because we haven't seen them in a couple of weeks and they're probably going to feed us. And so you'd go and visit them, partly because you were hungry, but also because, you needed to see them. Sometimes it wasn't as good when you had a set meal appointment and you had to go and visit 2 or 3 Islander families in a row. So you knew you were going to eat 2 or 3 times in a row. But within the different cultures, there's a lot of similarities and a lot of differences. So like the Maoris have some, I guess in some ways, the difference is that they have a lot more of the religious, cultural kind of like structures and buildings set up in New Zealand. And so the center of like the Maori culture in terms of their building or their meeting places is called a marae. And it's a building, if people are familiar with the Polynesian Cultural Center, you see these typically red buildings that they have these kind of pillars that come up the front and then these big beams that come down diagonally off the side. And they're all carved intricately all up the side. And those all have meanings and history of a certain like tribe or I'm trying to remember what they call it. Tribal. Yeah, that's close enough, I guess, for our purposes. And that's kind of a very important place for them. That's where they have their graveyard is usually a part of the marae, and they have a very strong view of what happens to the dead and a lot of respect for them. And before someone can officially go onto a marae, they're supposed to have kind of this official welcome onto it. And when that happens, they have you'll go and you'll sit with this group of people, and the chief or someone like that of the tribe will get up and will speak and give kind of a quick history of the people, and then there will be kind of speeches on both sides as like welcoming one group, kind of saying, thank you, and then you'll go through and you will meet all the members of the tribe quickly, especially the older members. And when you meet them, they have what they call a hongi, which is for the, if it's between a man and a woman, they'll just go up and kind of give a light kiss on the cheek. And between men, what they'll do is they'll place hands on shoulders and they'll they'll put their foreheads together and breathe in, and it's signifying of breathing in the breath of life, or sharing that breath of life together. And that's kind of a very traditional greeting between Maori men. And then you'll usually go on to the marae, and then they'll have a big meal. And after a meal, they'll have, if they'll have a time where they give speeches, but if you want to give a speech, you can't just get up and talk. Or if you do, then you have to sing or do a Haka, which is a war chant, basically. A lot of people are familiar with like the BYU football teams or the All Black rugby team who, before each game, will do a Haka. And that was originally used for war. And it was a means of kind of intimidating the opposing tribe that they were going up against and calling out challenges them. And there are different ones that come from different regions. And some of them are still used today. The most interesting one, in my opinion, is called the Tika Tonu Haka, which comes from the Hawke's Bay region. And they do that during funerals when the body is being carried to the grave to enter it into the ground. Then the men that are there will typically perform a Haka, often the Tika Tonu, not always, but often. Sometimes they'll have one that was more specific to that person, but that's usually what is done. And so you can have as few as 1 or 2 guys doing it, to as many as 200 men that are there, all doing the Haka as they're being brought to their grave site. And then they have a whole bunch of traditions with the Maoris that go around what they call New Zealand greenstone. I have a ring on that's made out of New Zealand greenstone, which really isn't very traditional, but they have necklaces and they used to make weapons out of it. And they have a lot of religious or spiritual, I guess, rather, maybe a better way to say it, beliefs that go behind it, where they believe that it was a sacred thing. And for like when they would have a priest in their tribe that would bless the greenstone, and then from the time that it was blessed, it can only be given as a gift. And so someone would get it and have the priest bless it, and they would give it to someone, and every shape has a different meaning. And when the person that receives the gift, when they first put it on, they're supposed to wear it for 1 full week before they, without taking it off and before anyone else touches it, because they believe that it helps to kind of attune their spirit to the greenstone. And if they do it before that, then it kind of gets contaminated by other people's spirit. And after that, that first week of wearing it properly, then, other people can touch it and can see it, and it's not really a big deal. And so they're kind of really big on things like that. And then they have different types of carvings, wood carvings, and various significances that go along with all that, all kind of tie back to like their ancestors and their family history that they have. It's all probably more than I could tell you right now. But that kind of is a lot of, I guess, the really big stuff. The Samoan and Tongan cultures are more similar to each other, I think, than they are to the Maori culture in a lot of ways. Again, very friendly and opening to missionaries. If they have a guest in the house, they have to feed them. They have a lot of culture that goes around tattoos that are designed for tribal use, and more so for leadership of the tribes than for other groups. So they have a certain tattoo for men, which goes from somewhere on their, I think it's a little bit above their belly button. I think it's kind of around their waist, higher, the true definition of the waist, I guess, the smallest part. And it goes down just from, I guess, just below the chest all the way down to their knees. And when they get it, it has to be done by hand. It's not done with like the tattoo guns that, would be used today. It would be done with a bone, and they kind of like, they tap it in with ink into the skin, and they do it over the course of a couple weeks. And so there's a lot of, I guess, interesting things that happen there, kind of in between that type of culture and church culture, because of the issue of tattoos and church culture. And that kind of clashes again over a drink called kava, which, if people have seen the movie The Other Side of Heaven, you see the missionary John Grober come into the Tongan culture, and he drinks this drink and he almost spits it out. And that's part of a kava ceremony, which the church has since said that the use of kava is against the word of wisdom, where for them it's part of how it's part of their kava ceremonies for becoming a high chief in a tribe, or various other honors. It's kind of an important part of the culture, and so there's a little bit of clash that happens there. But for the more part, the cultures line up fairly well with the church, which is kind of nice for us as missionaries.